we go. I'm so sorry. All right, now we're back. Okay. So as I said, children with autism spectrum disorder are really considered uneducable. And then a variety of researchers that I'm going to show you in just a second started taking the science of applied behavior analysis and developed intervention. So this is kind of a very big picture history lesson of intervention for students with autism. And the original research that was done was packaged as, discrete trial training or LOVAS training. And in a second, we'll talk about Dr. Lovaas. And then what happened starting in the, I would say, late 80s, a group of researchers continued to address the needs of students with autism spectrum disorder, and naturalistic interventions started emerging at that time. So incidental teaching, pivotal response training. Incidental teaching is in the East Coast, out in Georgia. Pivotal response training at UC San Diego and UC Santa Barbara. Milieu teaching out in Vanderbilt. So everything in science evolves, right? And so the same thing in education for our students with the autism spectrum. Let's see. Okay, so this is Dr. Ivar Lovaas, and he is really credited at being the father of modern ABA intervention and autism intervention. So really, without the pioneering work of Dr. Lovaas and all of his graduate students at UCLA in really like the 70s, he started doing this work in the 60s, and then the 70s and early 80s. What we know of in terms of students with autism, their abilities and the best practices to use with them would be non-existent. And in fact, those of us, there's a number of us who are BCBAs here today, like what our role, our position, our entire field would look probably not really exist. It would look very differently. So Dr. Lovaas used behavior analysis to teach pretty much every skill that you can think of under the sun. And when he started publishing this research, he published a very important study in 1987 that documented that not only could students with autism learn, but that approximately 50% of them could, through rigorous discrete trial training, so, and we'll talk about what discrete trial training is in a second, rigorous discrete trial training at a minimum of 40 hours a week could develop normal IQ. So the context for this that's important to remember is that prior to this work, most students with autism were not only considered uneducable, but considered that they could never, have a range of typical IQ. And so Dr. Lovaas's work at UCLA demonstrated, hey, not only can they learn to develop communication skills and engage in academics and engage in social skills, but that 50% can make so much progress that on standardized assessments, they are obtaining a IQ within like the normal range or the average range. So this rocked the universe, and everyone started doing research across the country and across the world on implementing the research that Dr. Lovaas had created and replicating it. And at that time in the early 90s, you started seeing the early intervention childhood study, or LOVAS, early start programs pop up all across the country. And these were the first ABA centers or ABA companies that started emerging. And in California, because we have the Department of Developmental Services, okay, another side history lesson. So California is the only state that has the Department of Developmental Services that has our state broken now into regions, and each region has a regional center that offers services to individuals with developmental disabilities. And prior to age 3, you don't have to have a specific diagnosis in order to be eligible for regional center services. You need to have a certain percent of delays in communication or socialization or behavior or physical or motor development. And then after age 3, you have to have one of 13 eligible developmental disabilities, and autism is one of them. So shortly after Dr. Lovas's publication, regional centers started contracting with vendors, with people to provide behavioral interventions to children with autism. And so this was the mode for children to be able to have in-home services. So when I was an undergrad in the mid-90s, this is how I fell in love with the world with autism. Is I volunteered in my Intro to Psych 101 class to go do a semester's work of internship for a local ABA company, fell in love with it, never turned back. And so regional centers used to fund ABA services. And then about 10 years ago, with insurance mandate, now insurance companies will fund ABA services. So everything has limitations. And I really want to make sure that I'm making it clear that this is not like a promo saying that naturalistic interventions are better than traditional or analog ABA. Analog ABA is what traditional ABA is referred to in the research literature. This is not a either or, like most things in life. It's a combination, and it has to be individualized to fit the student's needs and really to fit the family system as well, and the classroom system. So, but from the original research in 1987, there were some limitations of Dr. Lovas's discrete trial research. And one of them was limited spontaneity and independence. So students would learn the skills, they would learn the communication skills, they would learn the academic skills, but they really weren't spontaneously using these or independently. There was limited generalization. So they would learn the skills in the UCLA lab setting, but they weren't generalizing them to their special education classroom or to their home setting. There was high levels of disruptive behavior. And you have to remember, the very original ABA work looks very different than what's done in ABA services now, whether it be in a school capacity or a home-based capacity. But the original work was very much, sitting at the table doing kind of flashcard work over and over again until mastery, and then after certain responses, reinforcement being delivered. There was the use of aversives, but again, you have to understand that at that point in time, aversives were very much a socially acceptable way of teaching children, and we now realize that that's absolutely not okay. There were developmental appropriateness was a concern. So like literally having like a 4 or 5-year-old or even a 6-year-old sitting at a table doing like repetitive flashcards for hours on end at it throughout the day really wasn't developmentally appropriate. And then the time and cost prohibitive. So 40 hours a week of one-on-one delivered discrete trial training in a setting that was very limited with like distractions or stimulation is not necessarily the most practical or cost-effective way of being able to reach the masses of children. So then this lent to the development of naturalistic ABA, or naturalistic interventions, like the Affirm modules we'll talk about. And these are some of the main directors or main researchers in the field. So you have my advisor here, Dr. Bob Cagle from UCLA. You have Gail McGee with incidental teaching out at the University of Emory in Georgia. And you have Dr. Laura Schreibman from UC San Diego. And then you have oh my goodness, Marjorie Charlotte Christie from, oh my goodness, why am I blanking? Somewhere in Southern California. Sorry, didn't have enough coffee this morning. So here are some advantages of naturalistic ABA. So all of these researchers were grad students. So these two were grad students, all three actually. They were grad students, and she was an undergrad with Dr. Lovas at UCLA while he was doing his research in the 80s and publishing his big 1987 seminal study. And Gail was Todd Risley's student, who was one of the big founding fathers of like our modern ABA movement. So what happened is all of these students then finished their PhDs, went to their universities, and were applying for grants to address some of the limitations that they had found in those original studies. And what they found from naturalistic intervention is that there was an increase in spontaneity and independence and in generalization. And that's because some of the strategies that we're going to talk about really promote independence and really promote generalization. And because of some of these strategies, like child choice and following the child's lead, there was a decrease in disruptive behavior. So essential to naturalistic intervention is really developmentally appropriate and a lot of instruction that is based on the natural daily occurring and activities and routines of the day versus sitting at a table doing, like, you know, more old school traditional repetitive flashcards. There is a bigger emphasis on functional replacement skills. So again, another reason why naturalistic ABA, for us as educators in the school setting, this is a really good fit, right? Because we are so focused on building these skills. And then it was much more time and cost effective because you didn't have to have a separate room with a one-on-one therapist. You could do this in a group setting. You could do it in the naturally occurring setting of that child, which also includes school. Okay, I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions.
Sorry, this is off topic. I had a question about the Grow Consciousness.
Totally not off topic.
The Grow Consciousness series that you had mentioned, because I was signing up for all of those, and I noticed that in the last week of May, there are 3 Grow Summit.
And only 1 Grow Conscious Discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's on Friday. And then if you go to the June calendar, I believe it's June 2nd.
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make sure that wasn't some sort of a mistitling or something like that.
Thank you so much for pointing that out, because I guarantee you there's like 15 people who have the same question. So
okay, sorry. Thank you.
Don't apologize. This is what I love about these PDs, is that it's really a learning community. Like, this is stimming for me. Like, I could spend all day just like chatting and sharing information, because I love learning. I love sharing it, because for the most part, none of us have like 8 hours a day just to be sitting and learning. Like, if I could have been independently wealthy, I would have stayed in graduate school forever and just gone from one field to the other, because I really enjoy learning, and then I really enjoy sharing it. Any questions right now? I know this is kind of boring. We'll get into like some other stuff, but it's helpful to have a context for where education for our students with autism and special education came from and where it is now. So any questions, comments? Okay. So I'm going to summarize like the key components of naturalistic intervention. And I think there's a slide here, but in a group that I did last week, I asked the question, and there was kind of quiet, and I said, it's a trick question, but is there anything, are naturalistic interventions and pivotal response training related? Who wants to take that one? What do folks think about that question?
Can you repeat the question?
Are naturalistic interventions and pivotal response training related?
Yes, there we go. Aren't they within the same settings? Isn't that what the basis of pivotal response training is?
Yes. So naturalistic intervention is kind of a big umbrella. And so the reason that the Afirm modules has them as 2 separate evidence-based strategies is that the way that the Afirm modules selected those 27 evidence-based practices, it was in 2001 and then again in 2011, the National Research Council took all the research that has been done in autism, and they had strict criteria for what was an evidence-based practice. And they had to have so many like group design studies, so many single subject research studies. It couldn't just be one study, oh, it worked, and then, you know, it got included. So the reason that they differentiated pivotal response and naturalistic intervention is that there's actually, naturalistic intervention is the umbrella, and pivotal response training is one of them. So you have incidental teaching underneath it. You have Jasper from UCLA there. You have Early Start Denver model there. You have milieu instruction underneath there. So you have a variety of different models underneath the umbrella of a naturalistic intervention, and pivotal response training just happened to have enough group studies to meet the criteria for its own evidence-based practice standard. That's all it was. All naturalistic interventions share these components alike. So they may look a little different, they may be packaged a little bit different, and you also have to remember these are these people's lives. So you have UCLA, you have UC Santa Barbara, you have UC San Diego, you have Vanderbilt, you have Harvard, you have Yale, you have, you know, University of South Florida, you have University of Georgia and Emory, you have Chapel Hill in North Carolina. They all are doing this research, and of course they're all going to call it different things, right? Because that lends to, like, you know, their models being able to be disseminated, but they all share these basic key components. And they include natural environment, so doing intervention and teaching in the natural environment, parent education. Each one of these models has a huge component of parent education. And the reason for that is that unlike the original, like UCLA discrete trial research that really did not train parents, when you teach parents how to teach and support their child's learning occurs round the clock. It doesn't happen just at school or just when the ABA therapist is there, right? Totally makes sense. All share a huge emphasis on providing choice to students. And we'll talk quite in detail about that in a little bit. All have elements of shared control, and I'll explain what that means. Natural reinforcement, we talked a little bit about that. Interspersal of like easy to harder tasks, and then including turn taking in here. Reinforcing attempts versus being very strict with what we're reinforcing. You're reinforcing the student's attempts to kind of keep that behavioral momentum going. And then initiations, building specifically opportunities for students to lead their own learning, okay? All right, so already mentioned those. Okay, so natural environment. So it's any setting that the child or their family participates on a regular basis. And for us, and parents are realizing this right now with this pandemic, is how essential school is, right? School is, next to being at home, is probably the dominant natural environment that students are in. And so that includes everything that there is to do at school, and then outside of school, playgrounds and parks and shopping centers and restaurants and friends' homes and church and leisure centers. And then typical daily routines and activities. So learning should occur not at designated times. So this isn't like your work time. This is learning embedded as those opportunities arrive. So instead of waiting to practice when you're at the table for the student to say open, 10 times in a discrete trial format, every time you encounter an opportunity for the student to naturally say the word open. So for example, you're transitioning from the classroom to the playground, you can stand by the door, and for a student who's learning to communicate, you can model open. And when the student says open, then you open the door, right? Or if it's at lunch and, your student with, autism starts, vocalizing that they're upset, or starts like flailing their bag of chips and saying, Miss Rosie, Miss Rosie, Miss Rosie. That could be a natural opportunity to have them, to practice having them in a more appropriate way get attention, right? So you seize those opportunities as they naturally occur in routines and activities. Parent education, we kind of really talked about that, is teaching parents how to provide this with in their own natural activities and routines. And there's a big emphasis in having parents learn how to implement these procedures with fidelity, meaning that the core steps and strategies they're able to implement them, whether they're doing like a hygiene routine, or they're setting the table, or they're leaving the house to get in the car to go to the park, so that they know how to, if they're performing their skills with fidelity, then they're going to be able to perform them across settings. And learning across your daily activities is going to generalize your skills. Parent education is done with practice with feedback. So it's not where they're sitting and just listening to me lecture. So when I would do parent education, it's you're on the floor playing with the parent, or you're engaged in the activity with the parent, you're grocery shopping with the parent, and you're practicing how to use the naturalistic interventions in their routines. You model it, and then you give the parent the opportunity to do it, and then you coach them with feedback. And because you're doing that, it's focused on empowering parents, and it's very family centered. Another key component of parent education with naturalistic ABA is that it's not the therapist or the teacher that picks the most important thing to work on or the goal. It has to be family centered. And, there are many times where, as the outsider, you're thinking, oh, we need to work on this and this and this. But the family, the most important thing to them is being able to read to their child during the bedtime routine. So then that's what you work on. And why would you want to work on goals that are meaningful to families?
To encourage participation.
Absolutely. So if there's not a goodness of fit, and if it's not something that's meaningful, do you usually participate, and are you motivated to do the hard work? No. Yeah.
No, I think also it's functional for in the home. I mean, there's things obviously the kid needs to do and learn in school that need to be worked on, that families need to be able to function at home outside the school setting. And so that gives the family an opportunity to be able to use things and learn things that are going to be functional in the home setting that help them there.
Shaylin, and it doesn't just have to be you, but anyone, do we do parent education as educators in the school setting?
I mean, I think to some extent we do. We try.
Mm-hmm.
There's limitations, obviously, because I think it depends on what realm you're in. Like I work for the county with preschoolers specifically, so we're in homes more than, say, K through 12 would be in the homes. So do the best we can, and then it's also limited on willingness of families to participate or get back to you as well.
But the reason I asked that question was kind of loaded, and you answered it perfectly, is that I think we forget how much we do with parent education, and how much we coordinate with our families, and how much that impacts their daily routines with their kids. Share with me your guys' thoughts and observations about why learning around the clock and learning how to implement learning opportunities across our school routines is so important versus just having designated times to be practicing building skills. There's got to be someone.
You take those teachable moments when they come up. Those are the times where the child is most receptive, is when those teachable moments come up.
Yep. That's exactly. And what happens with those teachable moments? What's going on there?
They're either encountering a problem, they're encountering something that they enjoy. It can be either way.
Right. So their motivation is high, right?
Yeah.
So whatever need is going on there is increasing that internal motivation. And our brain, when we're motivated either to like avoid something we don't want, escape something we don't want, to obtain access to something we want, our brain is actually in a really good learning moment there. And that's why, research in natural interventions are like emphasize seizing all of those opportunities. And it's always really fun to teach like support staff, instructional assistants, how to step back and look at their activities with students and find ways where they could be providing more and capitalizing more on those teachable moments. Please share how you guys have done this, either yourself, like where you've learned to step back and look at, oh, there's an opportunity there, there's an opportunity there, and then how that impacts your students' learning.
I'm not sure if this exactly is answering your question, but I was thinking that sometimes I will create those, I will try to be conscious of creating those natural opportunities more often. So even though I might not need them to do something to get through the day, I'll create the need for them to do something just so they have that naturalistic chance to practice a skill. So I'll create more opportunities consciously.
Perfect. And that's using environmental arrangements. Give us a concrete example of how you do that and why you would want to do that.
Well, I guess to jump on your example of opening the door, say to go out to recess, I could just open the door and let them all out, right? I could, or I could just have the line leader, the first student, ask to open the door, and then everybody goes all outside. Or I could take the time and do it slowly and methodically, and have each child, come to the door individually as they're cleaning up, and go outside one at a time with an aide who's out there, waiting for them. And each one, as they finish their cleanup process, can come to the door and ask to have the door opened for them. So I could create that learning opportunity by making that transition different.
And that's what I was alluding to, like when you step back and kind of look at your day and you realize really how many, like if there was like a computer that could like point out all the different learning opportunities that there are. And the more that we learn about these strategies, the more our eyes become clear, our sight becomes clearer. And again, this isn't just for students with autism, right? So there's a fantastic class that I went to right before we went into shelter in place, and it was a kindergarten classroom, and they're wiggly. Like kindergartners are wiggly. In fact, we're all wiggly. Like all of this Zoom sitting is killing my lower back. So you're going to see that I'm going to stand up in about 5 minutes. But what this teacher did is, before she released them out to recess, to help them learn and to develop those skills of containing their bodies, being in line and not touching each other, they would practice a mindful moment of waiting. So they would all get in line and they would be like, wiggly, and she'd ring the bell, and she'd be like, okay, scholars, we're going to practice, waiting. Everybody take your deep breath in, deep breath out. And then she would just start counting to 15 or whatever number. 1, 2, 3. And it was really cool to see the kids just like contain themselves and then hold their bodies. And then because they knew she'd built this up, she started counting to 5, and then I think she counted to like 20, one of the observations I did. And then she would open the door, right? And then they would go out. And so I thought that was such a beautiful way of seizing a natural routine of practicing waiting and controlling your bodies and self-regulating versus waiting to need like a behavior intervention plan for like 3 students. She was doing it class-wide for all of her kids. Okay, let's move on to that third component. Okay, choice and turn taking, which are my favorite. Who does not love choice and turn taking? Do we like, as grown-ups, being told exactly what to do and exactly how we're going to do it and exactly when we're going to do it?
No.
No.
Of course not. We all want control.
Yes. Except as grown-ups, we forget that with little humans, because we are coming from our own experiences of growing up of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that children should be seen, not heard, right? And then all of a sudden in adulthood, we get choice, right? So again, some of these things you're going to be like, ugh, this is a no duh moment. Of course, choice, opportunities for choice, help engagement, help with responding, help with follow through, help build rapport, help practicing students do, willingness to practice hard things. But not too long ago, like, women, in the 70s had to have their father or husband co-sign for them to be able to have a banking account or a credit card, right? So, and because of our menstrual cycles, we were not capable of being in important roles and positions, right? Because we were overly emotive and hysterical. So sometimes we have to have this, the research and the science behind it to contradict our inaccurate myths and default settings of, well, this is how everybody's done it for hundreds of years, and this is how we're going to keep doing it. And choices is what is one of the naturalistic intervention one of the contributions of naturalistic intervention that I think is really paramount for that we see in all special education. Like one of the biggest strategies that we use as special educators, and that now our general educators are realizing, oh yeah, we should do this too, is providing students with choice. So give me some examples of how you guys in your interactions or your teaching with students provide choice and turn taking with students.
At the preschool level, we do that often with fun games so that they can learn to modulate turn taking with peers and adults. They're motivated because they want to have their turn to play the fun game.
Right.
We have choices as far as the cafeteria on a daily basis. Kids choose from a range of 3 to 5, depending on the student, of what they want for lunch rather than us choosing their lunch for them.
What about with seating? Are you guys in classrooms that you see now changes in the options and choices of sitting arrangements, like where they're sitting?
I've given choices where they can choose to sit on the carpet for group time, or they can sit on a chair.
Yep.
Just because it does give, I have noticed that it does give them it's like a turnaround in wanting to be a part of the group.
Yep.
It's that feeling of I have to have a choice on something.
Yes. That's what some of the most, like the research in choice making is really pretty powerful, because it can be something as simple as choice of which writing instrument. So again, it's not like free willy, nilly stuff of like kids are just running amok. It's, you use these motivational strategies to help students be engaged and concentrated in their learning. And so the simple option of, do you want to use a pen or a pencil or a colored crayon to do this math worksheet, again, gives that sense of, oh, I have a say in what's happening, especially with stuff that I don't necessarily like or is hard for me.
So Rosie, I wanted to comment with my student is, once we started giving him more choices, the physical blows really de-escalated. So it was like he would want to have his computer in a certain place, but we wanted it in a certain place. Some staff would work with him, but then we said, okay, it doesn't matter. Take your computer wherever you want to work, as long as you work. And it really started to de-escalate him, because he was choosing where he wanted to sit, where he wanted to work. And make his choices.
Yes.
And on the same note, we had the same thing. A student that came from a different program, when we started giving him choices, his behaviors also, came back in line. It was easy to work with.
Yep. And were they willing to work through like the hard academic content with small elements of choice?
Way better.
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. This is really like, if you walk away with anything today about naturalistic intervention, is how powerful choice is. And the research in choice really came from this work for the world of autism. And now we kind of, in education, that tends to be one of the first things that we do with our kids if they're struggling behaviorally, is we look at where can there be choice, right? Choice of how many items to do on this page. Choice of, if you're struggling with this, there's an alternate task bin that you can go choose something else to do, right? And so again, these seem kind of like no-brainers now, but even 10 years ago, and there's still sites all over the country and all over our state where, we engage in power struggles with students that really shouldn't exist, right? And we engage in those power struggles because of all of the default settings that we have as grown-ups. And then you do something like turn taking and choice, and it's a huge difference. We have a student that we have been supporting with who is a 8th grader, and he it's not unusual for students with autism to have macrographia, where like they just have a harder time with like size and positioning of their writing, and also like, you know, reading a piece of text, comprehending it, and then answering questions. And so writing responses to literature for this student is really, really hard. He has a super hard time. And his current perseverative interest, like every other kid, is Fortnite. And so what we were able to work with his English teacher is that he could read the text, and he could read the questions, and he could answer it as though it was one of his characters from Fortnite, as long as he was demonstrating like he understood what he had read. And just providing that choice took away all of the avoidance of going to gen ed. He would go, he was willing to go. And then once he was going consistently, we started giving him the choice of, hey, do you want to do, you know, 4 answers with like your Fortnite characters, or do you want to do 3 and then earn some extra bonus bucks for trying just the question that, you know, Ms. Polinsky has on here? And because he was motivated, he had been having good behavioral momentum with attending and not engaging disruptive behavior, guess what he was willing to do?
All right, second that sense.
Yeah.
Try again more.
Yep, he did more.
I
Okay.
think you make a good point in not staying necessarily in the many choice world, that you narrow that down as the child progresses.
Yes.
And can handle more, because the goal is for them to be able to comply in a natural setting with the social norms of a job or whatever it may be. So I think that's a great point to make that.
Kim, that is so, thank you so much for, and so astute, thank you so much for highlighting that, because the goal of all interventions is eventually to fade, so that the natural contingencies of whether it be school, your peer group, you know, your job training program, your job, your home, the natural contingencies that we all abide by are in play, right? And so it's not that you're providing this level of choice or this level of prompting and you stay there forever. That's a mistake that we make. So when we talk about shared control right here and following the child's lead, it's super important that we remember this element of shared control. This is one of the things that I love the most about PRT. So PRT, Behavioral Response Training, it has a big heavy component on this term called shared control, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's that in order to really seize the child's motivation, it can't just be free willy-nilly just following the child, right? Because as human beings, will we persist through hard things, or do we tend to kind of avoid the hard things?
We avoid.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter if we're 2, 22, or 102, we avoid. It's just a brain response, right? Because, you know, we're like, wait, this is too much. This may mean I'm not safe. And so it's all these like old neural pathways for like thousands of years that are still in our DNA, as opposed to, hey, I can work through this with the support of caring and nurturing people. So when I talk about choice or following the child's lead, that doesn't mean we do that without parameters. So shared control is the idea that as the adult or the instructor, the adult, we have parameters for learning, and we place choice. We place all of these like motivational strategies as a way to keep the child engaged, but we still are in charge, right? You just don't have to have it be in this like very like authoritarian fashion, right? So in order to have shared control, like the instructor, we should identify what's motivating the child and how they can obtain contingent control. So what this means is, in a very simple way in the preschool, or like not just preschool age, but let's say for a student who's minimally verbal, the student is reaching for the box of crayons. So you see the student reaching for that box of crayons, you get physical control of it. You don't yank it from the kid. If the kid's already touching, you can say, oh, it's my turn. And then you provide the opportunity. Do you want the green crayon or do you want the red crayon? If that's like linguistically a match for the student. Or you can say, what are you going to draw if it's a student who's verbal, right? And then you contingently give it to them at that point. Think about how you guys do this. How do you have shared control with your students? And again, does not have to be just for younger students or students with more profound needs. Think about it even for like our high schoolers. How do we have shared control with our students to reinforce their effort?
For our student at Oregon Junior High, we use like a choice paper basically, and he gets 3 choices that we've picked, and then he can choose once he's done with his work which choice he wants to use. So like painting, coloring, or like cars or something like that, and then he can use that to kind of keep control of his own situation. And then
perfect. I love that. Now, Victoria, share to the whole group what's essential in that menu of choices. Like what's super important
for him?
Well, when you set up the menu of choices, what are you making sure?
That he has like motivation basically to do his work and to be able to finish it on time and everything.
So you wouldn't, if this kid doesn't like crocheting, would you put crocheting on the menu?
Definitely not.
No. But we have had a student who was obsessed with crocheting and putting photos on Pinterest of her crochet projects. And so different needles and linens, it's not linens, I'm such a dork, threads were options that, she would get to pick from for engaging in like certain tasks. So you have to make sure that whatever you use as reinforcer is reinforcing to that student.
Yeah, we actually had like a whole list of like basically his top favorites, and then his more medium favorites and everything like that. And if something wasn't going well for the day, then we would switch to something less favorite of his and go from there.
Perfect. I love that. Okay. Interspersing acquisition and maintenance. So maintenance are those skills that the child is already familiar with and preferably like mastered, right? So if you're doing math with a student and they've really mastered, they're really familiar and successful with using touch points, right, in their math, like in touch math, and you're fading that to intersperse just the equation without the touch points, right? Should you have 1 master touch points example and 15 acquisition? Is that a good interspersal of maintenance and acquisition?
No.
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 Why?
I think it'd be overwhelming for the student.
Agreed.
Right. So depending on whose research you're reading, it can vary. Some people say like 1 maintenance to every or 1 acquisition to every 3 or 4 maintenance. Some say 1 to 7. It kind of varies, and kind of I think the takeaway that the Affirm modules say it should be 50-50 at minimum. But what do we know about students? IEP. What's that I?
Individuals.
Yeah, it needs to be individualized. Some days, everything is great. The student got great sleep. Everything at home's awesome. They ate their breakfast. So really you can stretch it to like 1 maintenance to every 4 things that are hard, right? But then literally after lunch, they're tired and it has to be like 10 maintenance to 1 acquisition, right? And again, like you're not going to do this flawlessly. You're going to mess up all the time. I was trained in this for, gosh, how long did it take me to finish? 7 years. And I mess up constantly, right? So, but knowing that, oh, he seems to be struggling a little bit. Maybe we just need to like look at like maintenance to acquisition and kind of keep his behavioral momentum going. Because is it better for us to have our students engage in easier tasks, but they're still engaged in school work, or push the acquisition and then we trigger meltdowns?
No, keep them engaged.
Better not to trigger.
Yep. My favorite trick or tip to teams is have a basket in the back of your classroom, literally no matter what grade you're in, that has like art mandalas, and you can get them age appropriate ones, or just coloring books that you make photocopies of, and another basket of just easy, like literally like easy, like word searches or mazes, or like super easy math that when your students, and make this class-wide. I worked with a teacher this last year that literally told all of her kids in her resource math class, if you're just not digging it, there's no questions asked. Get up, go to the alternate task basket and pick something and do something. And she had such little issues with kids being off task or disruptive. What she would still ask students to turn that in. And then she would just like monitor, oh, you know what, Susie literally hasn't done our classwork for 6 days in a row. What's going on? And then there would be like addressing of the issue. Lisa, do you have a comment?
No.
I have one comment that I think Rosie and I talked earlier last time, that my nephew who has autism, you know, mastered his one workbook, and instead of, when he was given this next workbook, it just completely froze. So we took the original notebook 1, tore out pages and started out with every other page, and gradually took them all out, and he was in the new workbook and he was doing fine.
That's amazing. Yep. I love that. Please share some examples.
Also, Rosie, could I say something? With the interspersing the maintenance and the acquisition skill tasks, if they're having success in their maintenance, that helps motivate them. They feel good about themselves and they're a little more willing maybe to participate longer.
That's exactly what it is. 100%, Charmaine. Think about us. If we showed up to work and literally it was 100% acquisition, we'd all give up. Right?
Right.
And actually neuroscience tells us, so this is the really cool about the direction. I hope I live to be 100 just to like bug my sons. I just want to be that little old lady just to bug them. I'm going to be a great little old lady, but like I just told my 17-year-old, be nice to me because when I'm 100 years old, but I really can't wait to see over the next 15 years what happens with all of the technology we have, and really being able to prove how things like interspersing maintenance and acquisition totally changes brain integration. So when we're making sure that it's actually a higher amount of maintenance to acquisition, they now have studies literally showing, fMRI studies showing how the brain is learning faster, right? Whereas like back in the day, we thought, you know, my mother likes to share, I mean, my mother only went to school up till the 2nd grade, but she would say how they would just sit there and like write the same thing over and over and over again in total silence, and then get like hit with, you know, a ruler. And because the thought was repetition of acquisition was the best way to learn. Now we know it's actually not. And so I really can't wait until technology is cheap enough that like every classroom is able to like show like, oh, let's take a weekly probe of how like Billy is learning. And then we're able to literally make those decisions based on actual hard science on how the brain is learning. So anyone want to share any other examples of maintenance and acquisition and how they've put it into practice with their kids and students?
Well, I worked with another student when I first started in special ed, and he had regular folder work and got to the point where he wouldn't do it at all. But during his free time, he'd be watching us do our reports or doing, he was very interested in writing. So we just started with dot to dot. And finally, by the time he graduated from 8th grade or finished 8th grade, he was able to write his own name and phone number and address. And because he became interested in it, he was watching us and we just adapted it to include what he could do and what he wanted to do.
I love that. That's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I just think as a resource teacher, it's a hurdle to get over for general ed teachers sometimes to recognize that student's shutting down because the work is too difficult. And if we take a step back or take a different strategy or watch for the triggers before he gets to that frustration mode, that we can really help the student. But I think sometimes mindsets are so geared to the student completing the work. And I think some of the pressure of Common Core and all of that from the general ed teachers is forcing them into the push in the box, but opening the brain up to having a different mindset of the reason students, I find all students they all want to learn. It's just, can they be successful at it? And are they motivated, and do they feel good about it, or do they feel defeated by it? And we just have to find that starting point and meet them where they're at and move forward. But getting everybody on that same page is difficult.
It is. It's always about the grownups, right? And you hit the nail on the head when you said the mindset, right? And things like Common Core, right, or No Child Left Behind have great intentions, but they typically don't lead to what they're hoping to lead to, right? And I'm hopeful that this like terrible experience that we're all going through collectively is really going to push a reanalysis of how we look at education in this country, right? And I think the more that we get science out there, the more that we start recognizing that mental health isn't something that you just do like for 10 sessions because that's what your insurance will pay, or that you do as a grown-up. That the more that we're forced to address these conversations, that hopefully future generations will have much better outcomes than like we do and our current students. But that our gen ed colleagues are sometimes resistant, or even us are resistant to these things because they don't fit our current mindsets. And also because when our kids are struggling, typically we process that as it's keeping me from doing my job, right? Because he's off task, he's misbehaving, I can't teach my lesson, and it's keeping other students from learning, it's taking away their rights, so I need you to leave, right? And it all boils down to that we're not able to complete what we think we need to complete. So I'm hoping that the more, and that's why I really want to push you guys to do the conscious discipline modules, because it's the direction that education and child development and the world is going in. There is no turning back from that. Well, there's no turning back, but there may be major hurdles that are put in the way. But the more that we all become educated about this, the more that we have the grassroots effort to move forward, and push this. Okay, I'm trying to be sensitive with time. As you can tell, I love talking about these things, but hence why I could do a PD for 8 hours. Another naturalistic component is reinforcing attempts. So in comparison to the really early ABA and really early behavioral research, it was had a very strict shaping contingency. And contingency means like you do A and then B happens, right? Naturalistic intervention tends to be a lot more looser and focused on attempts. So instead of like writing the A perfectly and only getting reinforcement when you're doing that, for that student first, just maybe even getting the pencil to the paper, you're going to reinforce that. And then you just successfully reinforce and build up. and reinforce and change how you're reinforcing and based on how the student is performing. So this is kind of like a no-brainer. Give us some real life examples, both elementary and secondary, of how you guys reinforce attempts.
Hi.
Hi, Beatrice.
Hi. With our kids in preschool, when they are first learning to utilize a writing implement, as soon as they even pick it up and make some kind of line or whatever it may be, we reinforce that so that they get a feel as, oh, yay, I did this, and next time maybe it'll keep moving forward eventually after so many times of reinforcement and so on. So that's one way.
Beautiful.
I think I can build on that a little bit.
Go for it.
I think in the early stages of the development of those type of things, having kind of a guaranteed success built in is really a key strategy. Yes. to help both build confidence and to build the specific skills to fulfill the kind of later, more difficult stages of whatever type of process you're going through.
Perfect. I love that. I love how you said that. I kind of have a funky one. So this year I had a student, a 7th grade student, who, you know, you would see the student and some pretty negative narratives would go in grown-ups' minds, and a big guy who just kind of oftentimes would have a scowl and just people would process as like him being threatening, and man, he loved dropping F-bombs. And just like a lot of junior high students apparently do, but most of them will drop those F-bombs when they're, you know, in their lunch groups or with their peer group, but they don't do it in class. And this student constantly do it in class and constantly get kicked out. So of course, you know, the function was he was really trying to get out of his English class. So we developed a whole behavior intervention plan with him. And one of the first steps with like teaching him not only like an appropriate way of escaping, but also trying to reinforce him containing the cursing, because at this point he'd had years of just kind of cursing as like it was his default setting. I suggested that he write the F-bomb instead of, verbally vocalizing it, and that every time he did that, that writing would be basically his self-management, and that for each, you know, period, he'd get to cash in that for money, bucks, towards like buying stuff that he wanted from the student store. And he really thought I was a crackhead. He's like, so you want me to write the F word? I'm like, yeah, just write it. Here's a piece of paper. And the first time he did it, he really thought I wasn't going to reinforce him. And like, I doubled the points that he got. So I think he wrote it like probably like 34 times. So he ended up like getting $68, which meant he immediately could go to the student store and buy his Takis that he had wanted. And so what do you think started happening? Because I did that really weird reinforcing it. And the gen ed teacher was like looking at me like, oh, you get paid to do the weirdest things. But what do you think started happening?
He stopped using the F word, I'm assuming, because
he did. And he also stopped writing it.
It was less
we can't hear you. Charmaine, you're totally cutting out.
Something?
I can't hear you. I'm going to try to guess what you're saying. So what we did is, go ahead.
Different.
Sorry, totally can't hear you. What I was going to say is very quickly, kind of the shock value of cursing in the class, and just the fact that I was willing to like reinforce him. Just
replace it with?
So he did replace with like asking to leave appropriately. But for this student, we were eventually, oh, now I think it's me. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. For this student, not only did he learn how to ask to leave the class, because he was not at grade level.
Yes.
And so it's never the replacement behavior. The replacement behavior is just a Band-Aid. It's a more adaptive way of like meeting whatever you need to at that point. It's really addressing all of those lagging skills or what's really the core deficit, right? And for this student, he was reading like a 3rd grade level, right? And so it was him, learning how to appropriately exit a situation without creating this giant scene, because that was how he would save face. And then it was also him learning that, hey, if I work with the resource teacher, I'm actually, going to do much better in a Read 180 class than this Gen Ed class. And so again, it's the whole point of that example, which is a totally like, off kilter example, was that the Gen Ed teacher's like, you're really going to reinforce him for writing the F word? I'm like, yes, because I'd rather him write it than vocalize it, right? And it did not take more than, I'm not joking, it didn't take more than 3 times of him doing that. And then it was like the need to use that inappropriate behavior was taken away. He realized we were going to be reinforcing and connecting and supporting him at whatever level he needed. And so his need to avoid in that grandiose way was eliminated. Anyone else have a couple examples that they would like to share? Okay, I'm going to move on to initiations. So initiations are spontaneous independent responses, are questions, comments. And so this is really important that we teach kids how to initiate, because it's essential for active learning. Otherwise, if students don't learn how to initiate, they're always going to be dependent on an adult prompting them or an adult helping them or an adult cueing them. And then the reason that all naturalistic interventions have this shared component of initiations is that research has shown it's a strong indicator of long-term positive outcomes. So give us some examples of different kinds of initiations that you teach your students.
Raising your hand or asking for help.
Absolutely.
Asking for something before they just get up and take it.
Right.
Asking for a break when they need it.
So key, because if we don't teach them to initiate that, can we understand people's internal states?
No.
No. We read the outside cue, but usually by the time that there's the outside cue, things are beginning to spill over, right?
I think a couple times that we
Say that again.
Go ahead.
Charmaine, go ahead.
Okay. Would for manding being initiated, having the item they're looking to play with or whatever, were out of their reach?
Yes.
So they would have to initiate manding for that.
Yes. So it would be those environmental arrangements, right?
Also, I'm
Go ahead.
I'm guilty by, I know what he wants, and I have to go to myself to count to 20 subconsciously to give him time to answer and give him a VOCA so he can use the VOCA to really ask me to tell me what he really wants.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great one. So I just realized what time it is. I love doing this, and time flies when you love what you're doing. Hopefully you're not all snoozing. So I want to talk a little bit about reinforcement, because essential to all work with students and just humans, understanding principles of reinforcement is just going to really augment your ability to be an effective instructor. And so I want to talk a little bit about artificial versus natural reinforcement. This is not an either or, good or bad. They're both. They're both essential, and it's just about understanding them and then knowing how to apply them with your students. So for artificial reinforcement, it's typically not related to the activity at hand, whereas with natural reinforcement, it's directly related. So going back to that original example of you're at the door and you have the student ask to open the door. That's a natural reinforcement for asking to open the door or requesting door or open. Same thing with like the student who wanted to open their snack bag, right? So it's directly related. For teaching like functional behavior, functional replacement behaviors, you have to make sure that that replacement behavior is functionally equivalent and hopefully as, if not more efficient to the disruptive behavior. So you have to teach them what's a more adaptive way of getting their needs met. So if the student is misbehaving to escape something, you can't just give them an easier assignment. You have to teach them how to appropriately ask for a break or ask for help or ask to leave the area or ask for an alternate task. And then eventually you can skill build like what the underlying deficit is. With artificial reinforcement, it typically isn't directly related to the child's behavior, whereas with natural reinforcement it is. With artificial reinforcement, oftentimes it's like chosen by the child. Oftentimes it's chosen by the adult. So it's a lot of times, this is a mistake that we oftentimes as grown-ups make in using reinforcement, is that I'll have teams, say, well, reinforcement doesn't work for him. Well, reinforcement works for everybody. Reinforcement works for pretty much every single creature, right? If it's not working, it's because you didn't do, I think it was Lisa earlier had shared that they made sure they did like a preference check. They just simply identified what directly from the student, usually interviewing the student or giving for our nonverbal students, placing items to see what they reach for. You have to know what the person is motivated by and interested in, and it finds it to be reinforcing. A lot of students love watching sports videos or, talking about sports with staff. I can't stand sports. You make me watch like a football game. That's punishment. That is not reinforcement. So again, it's super important to know what is reinforcing to the person. So that tends to be one of our big mistakes with artificial reinforcement. And then with natural reinforcement, it's usually determined by the child's motivation, especially like in the examples that people gave of like noticing that the student tends to gravitate towards the swings. So maybe you create, if they're avoiding writing, you have them write the word swing so that they can then access swinging. I want folks to give me some examples of how they've used both artificial and natural reinforcement.
Going back to my nephew, he loves sports, and we taught him how to heat up his snack based on the scoreboard of a baseball game.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
so
really
he's
clever.
able to come home at lunch, come home after school, check the little note we leave him, or what the scoreboard looked like, and then he can push the start button, and then he can eat his own snack.
That's awesome. Very cool. Other examples of how you guys have used reinforcement, and whether it's artificial or natural?
Would an artificial reinforcement be when you are put in a situation where you have to remove a child from an activity or an event because of a behavior, and so you have to, I don't know.
That would be more of like a natural consequence versus reinforcement, because the key to reinforcement, which I made the faux pas and not explaining this, is that with reinforcement, you're trying to increase a behavior, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so you're using things to skill build, right? So for example, a student getting a point or a star for every addition, problem that they do, and then cashing those in
Okay.
for stuff in the student store is an example of an artificial reinforcer.
Okay, so we do that with like a chip reward. We have poker chips, and so when we see them working on task, we will put a chip on their table.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then at the end, they know how many chips they can earn. They can cash them in on.
Perfect. So token systems like that, Lisa, are really great, and they're kind of a gold standard way of using like artificial reinforcement in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
The example that I was giving with the points with math, a way to like have natural reinforcement embedded. Let's say students are learning their addition, and so they can use like, I've seen teachers have a big bowl of popcorn, and it gets harder and harder to use like edibles in our school settings because there's wellness restrictions, but also there's so many health and dietary considerations for students. But I remember in one of the classrooms that I worked in as an instructional assistant, the teacher would always make a bowl of popcorn, and the kids would practice by taking from their little bowl of popcorn 2 pieces of popcorn plus 2 pieces of popcorn, and then they would write 4, and then they'd get to eat all 4, right? So eating the 4 pieces of popcorn was directly related to doing that computation.
So that's an example of a natural reinforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was directly related, right?
Okay.
Excuse me. This is Deani. I just wanted to jump in and say, I know actually 2 examples of, I guess, kind of like natural reinforcement.
Yeah.
One, we had a student. Now, mind you, I work with 5-year-olds. So like you said earlier, yes, they're constantly wiggly. And, but we had a student where, she didn't like to sit, she just didn't like to stay seated. And so we had a sticker chart for her. And so every time that she would listen to the teacher and just do what she's told in the classroom, then she would earn a sticker. And then once she filled up her sticker chart, then we would give her like, maybe like a little treat. And then the other thing I was going to say was that in regards to with the 5-year-old, I guess with the natural reinforcement, I remember when we were celebrating our 100th day at school, we used not Cheerios, we used Fruit Loops and a Cheerio, so the students can make a necklace. But first, in order for them to make their necklace of 100 pieces of basically cereal on their necklace, they had to sort them out.
Yeah.
Sometimes either by color or sometimes just by counting by 10.
Awesome.
And once they finished making their necklaces, then they were allowed to eat them. But of course, it was obviously like after school was over. But yeah, those are just 2 examples of the different reinforcements that you were talking about.
I love that. Those were great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else have some examples? So
I was going to say in a preschool classroom, if the students are working at a small group and they're expected to finish a task or at least partially participate in the task before they can go outside to play, is that an example of a natural reinforcement?
Yeah, totally. So that happens in classrooms all the time. So in elementary and secondary school, natural reinforcement is being able to then like socially engage after you finish that task, right? So you'll hear teachers say, okay, guys, I need you to work quietly for the next 10 minutes, and then you guys can, chat. So they get through their tasks, everybody gets done, the timer goes off, and then they can have like 5 minutes of free time before they transition to the other activity. Absolutely. My last 2 things I want to share about reinforcement is if you can find natural reinforcement, use it. It's just much more powerful at generalizing skills for students and for being maintained in the natural environment. So do students typically get to have everybody in their life know how to use token systems and point systems and cash out systems? No. So if you could have it be a natural reinforcement as much as possible, something that they're going to increase the likelihood of having that same kind of reinforcement elsewhere, great. Seize it. But sometimes there isn't a natural reinforcement, especially in our school settings, right? Because maybe learning isn't natural reinforcing that subject for that student at that point in time. And so sometimes you have to use artificial reinforcement to teach a skill that then becomes natural reinforcing. So I want to give you an example of a high schooler with autism. He would become very disruptive when there would be multiple students. Oh, yes?
Oh, sorry. I was calling my daughter. I thought it was
okay. I thought it sounded like Rosie. So he would become very upset and engage in high amounts of self-injurious behavior and disruptive behavior towards others when the class size would get bigger. So remember, this is high school, so every period there's like different numbers of students coming to class. And so we wanted to teach him the replacement behavior of asking for a break. Now he's fully verbal, but has a very hard time initiating his communication. And so he does best with like written cue cards. So the staff had laminated little cards that said, I want a break, I want to go for a walk. And so he could also read at grade level. So the staff initially used artificial reinforcers. They had consent from the family to literally use M&Ms. He loved peanut M&Ms. And so they used peanut M&Ms to reinforce him to give the card to the teacher so that he could exit instead of being disruptive. Mind you, going for a walk, if he was totally regulated, he was calm, and you asked him what was his favorite thing to do at school, and he'd say, go for a walk on the track. But he wasn't in a place where that was natural reinforcing to say, you know, I need my replacement behavior to access going for a walk. So the team initially had to use artificial reinforcers of M&Ms to get him to realize, oh, hey, if I just give my teacher this card, I get to go walk on the track and then I can come back when I'm ready. And it took about, I want to say close to 2 months to completely fade the artificial reinforcement. And this was 2 years ago, and now he's a junior. And now he will go to any teacher and say, I don't like this class. I need to go for a walk on the track. And then he'll excuse himself. And we're polishing it off. Like we're trying to have him not say, I don't like this class, and say, this is too much for me. I'm going to take a break, you know, just to kind of polish it off a little bit so that he doesn't, you know, hurt other people's feelings. So that's just another thing I wanted to remind you of. Like, if you can use a natural reinforcement, use it. But sometimes we have no choice other than to use artificial reinforcement. And then eventually you can fade the artificial reinforcement because the activity itself or the replacement behavior becomes natural reinforcing. Okay, any last comments or questions about this? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up by sharing, my slides will work, this slide right here of like the ABC sequence of when, you know, the A is the antecedent, so it's things that we do before the student's response, and then the C is the consequence, is what we do after the student's response. And just to review some of the things here that we've talked about, like getting the child's attention, making sure that we have the child's attention before we give a demand, whether it be for academics or, you know, anything. Interspersing maintenance tasks, using that shared control and providing choice, following their lead. All of these things are things that we do, that we set up as part of the instructional opportunity. The child exhibits their response, and then we reinforce contingently. Contingently means based on what the student did. We reinforce those attempts, and then we provide direct and natural reinforcement, okay? And sometimes that direct reinforcement can't be a natural reinforcer initially. It's going to maybe be a point or a marble or, a chip or a sticker, right? And again, the whole point of that reinforcement is to increase the likelihood that that student is going to build that skill and use it in the future, okay? Any final comments about what we talked about last week and what we talked about today?
Rosie, are there any more meetings in this series, or is this?
So this series, the Affirm series, is it was just mainly to introduce people. Oh, can you guys hear me? I hear an echo. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. This series won't continue. I may do a few more of these in the fall, but my objective with doing these two Affirm module series is to introduce you to the Affirm modules and then just supplement just some of what they have with some of my knowledge from my graduate program. But I don't have that in the works for the remainder of this school year. But
Rosie, what was last week's training? You've mentioned a couple times. I wasn't a part of it. I'm just curious what was covered.
This training was a 2-part Affirm training. So it was 2 weeks ago. I did the first part where we kind of reviewed the history of autism diagnosis. I showed a couple of videos. We talked about the diagnostic criteria. We talked about how the rates and incidence and prevalence of autism has changed and what are the factors contributing to that. And again, when those become available online, you guys will be able to watch those.
Thank you.
Rosie, on the SELPA calendar, so you were talking about the growth courses to take, and then there's also the behavioral training. Are those the ones that we did over the summer last year?
No, they're totally different. They're new. And so, but I really, really, really can't stop emphasizing for you to do the Grow Conscious Discipline series. I will offer these behavior trainings all throughout next year.
Okay.
But because the conscious discipline is like a license that that the SELPA or whoever has to buy, that's why I'm pushing that one on you guys, because I don't know how many times that we're going to be able to host it. So take advantage of it.
I'm sorry, is it the same as the Grow Summit?
No. So the Grow Summit, the ones that say Grow Summit are just for the staff that work in the ED programs.
Okay.
Okay. The Grow Conscious Discipline is what you guys want to sign up for.
Okay. And we have the dates here, May 1st, 7th, and 8th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, the first one is tomorrow.
Yes.
April 30th. Yeah.
Rosie?
Yes.
Will we be notified when these are available on your site to review the videos?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So Brian Helt will be sending out like a mass email once they're available.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Sorry, Rosie, one more question. Are the behavior trainings you're doing after today, are those different than the ones you've already?
Yes, they're all new. They're all different. Yeah. But again, I also it's not that I don't want people to come to my trainings, because if no one signs up for my behavior trainings, I'll be joining Allison in the conscious discipline ones. But I just think that they're so well done, and they're, again, because it's kind of a time sensitive situation with the license, I just want you guys to take advantage of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was definitely conflicted with them both being at the same time.
Yeah. No, Lauren, I mean, any BCBA who's here needs to do the conscious discipline series.
I'm signed up.
Yeah. I mean, we all just need to do it. And like I said, I'll be offering the ones that I have on my behavior series. I'll be offering those next year throughout the school year. And if we end up at any point going into distant learning again, then the SELPA will augment their PD calendar to what we're doing now.
I just realized I actually have a tab open in like on my Internet Explorer about conscious discipline, and I just clicked on it, realizing that's this series, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
You probably have that because Allison and I have been touting that all year long and telling people, read it, read it, read it. And then we, had the SELPA was able to purchase the license for the year.
Well, I'm so happy they did, because I think in looking through all the behavior analyst support groups and then some of the trauma-based education, there's been a lot of questions, especially now that everybody's working from home, of what are the good resources, and that was one of them that was recommended. I just hadn't got to it yet.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Oh, I'm now excited. Really.
You guys are going to be really excited.
Quick question. The Affirm module courses, is there a time limit on, because I mean, I would like to get through as many as I can. Is that like an all-year thing?
That's available indefinitely. So it's
okay,
free.
good.
You can do it at your own time. And that's why with Shailene's question, I really just wanted people to know this is available.
Okay.
So until I went to the captain training 2 years ago, I didn't know that these modules existed, and they've been around for a while. And so I'm telling people all the time, even like colleagues of mine that work in other states, I tell them about the Affirm modules, because they can just go to the, website, and even though it's under the California Department of Education through Captain, anyone in the country, really anyone in the world, could go learn from those.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they've been just really helpful, and also just a good refresher on a lot of things that you kind of just, if you don't apply it, but you realize, oh, I really could use that. So I'm on my third one, I think, now.
Good for you. That's fantastic.
So Rosie, do the Affirm modules stay free? Like, always be free for a limited time?
You were totally cutting out. Can you say that again?
Sorry. Are the Affirm modules free?
They're all free. They're all free.
Rosie, what do we, I mean, because you get those certificates. Is it good to save those just for your file?
I personally think you guys should save those certificates. I think they're great. They're wonderful for you to have on your resumes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that would look good on your resume?
Yes, it would, totally. Yeah.
So Rosie, in the fall, will these still be offered free, or will they? Because at some point, I know I've had to pay for some of my trainings with you guys.
So I have no idea what the answer is for that. The Affirm modules are free for they're just perpetually free, because they have nothing to do with like any specific school district. With the SELPA trainings, I actually don't know. I will have to get back to you on that. I'm assuming that if there is a fee that your districts usually pay for you to enroll.
Right. Okay.
I have a question. For the conscious discipline modules, are those good for IAs to go to?
Oh, yes, please. Especially if you're an instructional assistant, sign up for those. Thank you for asking that question, Justine. I honestly think that everybody needs to do these series, like whether you are an educator or not. And again, that's why I was saying, even though you may work with like adolescents, and even though the conscious discipline modules as they're packaged right now are really focused on elementary, like preschool and elementary school kids, it's just good for human development. When I started learning, about this science 3 years ago, I kind of had this insane aha and then like panic moment of like, oh my gosh, I totally been such a jerk to my own kids, but you only know what you know until you know better. That's that Maya Angelou quote. And then when you know better, do better, right? So I've been really trying to modify my practice as a behaviorist and my practice as a mother based on all this new science that's come out, and it makes sense. Like, be mindful that you're like, really? And then just go through it, because what will make sense is that it'll make sense for you as a person. And then you'll realize, oh, if this makes sense for me as a person, this is how I should be teaching. This is how I should be parenting, right?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And the great thing about kids and humans is when we own up that we've like been on the wrong path and now we know better, like repairing is such an amazing thing. I remember telling my 17-year-old, I'm so sorry that I would give you feedback this way and I made you feel this way. And he's like, Mom, it's totally fine. You're a great mom. But it also was super important for him to hear that, hey, adults should admit when they've been on the wrong path or they've messed up, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And pass the word to other instructional assistants that you work with and say, hey, Dr. Rosy's been like crazily pushing everybody to do this, so sign up for it.
Okay, perfect. I will do. Thank you.
All right, guys, we are at the end of our time. Unless you have questions, I will stay for another 5 minutes to answer questions. The rest of you that don't, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Hi, Rosie. It's Deani. I got a question. I'm looking at the calendar for the SELPA trainings for, I guess, for the Grow Conscious one starting tomorrow.
Yep.
And I'm registered for, already registered ahead. So, and I've got to say that these PD workshops have been awesome. They've been excellent. So, so I just want to put that out there too. And so, okay, so my question is regarding, I see the Grow Summit for the 5th, right? Yes, I see that one, and then the one on the 6th. So should the IAs
don't sign up for the Grow Summit. The Grow Summit is just for our ED program. So unless you're working in a classroom with emotionally disturbed students, the specific program for that, there's only 19 of them in the county. Don't sign up for Tuesday, Wednesday. Sign up for the Grow Conscious Discipline. That's always going to be Thursday, Friday.
So Thursday, Friday mainly.
Yes,
okay.
Tomorrow, it'll be Friday. It'll be the 7th, the 8th, the 14th, the 15th, the 21st, the 22nd, and then there's only one on the week of the 29th. And then the last one is in June. Don't forget the last one, and it's on a Tuesday. And I don't know why they did that, because it's going to totally screw everybody up. But it's on a Tuesday. I'm like, no. Okay. Yeah, they should have done it on Thursday, but like,
yeah. Oh, yeah, because I think our last day of school for the school year is on. I think it is the 4th, that Thursday.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken.
Try to sign up for that last one on the 2nd. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And that's a really good one.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. So I guess that thank you for going back to May. So I guess for the ones that on so I'm wondering, so should I register for the one coming up on May 4th?
No.
Okay.
Just register for tomorrow, for Friday, and all the Thursday, Friday ones, and then that one.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying, because knowing me, I'm so used to registering. I've gotten so used to registering, for all the PD workshops. I'm like, well, hey, might as well just keep it going.
Well, and if you want to, I take that back. If you want to take the one on the 4th with behavior training, that's with Phil Pandek. He's another SELPA BCBA. Totally sign up for that one. You can sign up for any other ones. And honestly, if you sign up for the Grow Summit, you're going to learn. It's not going to be like you can't learn anything from it. You'll find it interesting. But the reason that I'm pushing for you just to sign up for Thursday, Friday is most people are still like the rest of the week, they're still helping students, they're helping their teachers. So, but if you have like 40 hours a week that you want to fill up, then fill up for every webinar and PD, that you can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Cause I think I'll be trying to get caught up on doing these Affirm modules.
Yes. So I would prioritize the Affirm modules to signing up for any ones on like Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
Monday through Wednesday. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, this is definitely good to know because, and I've really actually been enjoying the Affirm modules. Granted, yes, it is a lot of reading.
Yes.
But it's been very informative and helpful because my son has autism.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And so this has given me more of a better understanding. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how he thinks.
Right.
This is why he does what he does. Because, and quick story about my son was that we are a prior military family.
Mm-hmm.
So, so both of my sons were born in Japan. So that's our joke to everybody that, hey, we always tell people that our kids were literally made in Japan.
Oh, how fun.
And so, but yeah, so once we moved back into the States, I noticed, just that he was, I guess he had a lot of hand flapping going on. I just didn't quite know what was going on. And so once we got settled in California, we got him tested, and sure enough, he had, he's diagnosed with autism. And I obviously, started feeling bad, thinking, oh my gosh, it's like, is this something that I caused, like when I was pregnant with him?
Right.
And so, but long story short, he, I guess, fast forward to now, he loves to read, loves to write. He's been, bless his heart, he's been doing excellent with his massive homework packets from school. Yeah, so.
Honey, that's so great.
Yeah, and he's earned so many different types of awards, for like improvement in behavior, his work. So so he, so I definitely am thankful that that he's able to, I guess, to power through, having to deal with having autism. So
incredible.
Because
Good work, Mom.
Oh, hey, thank you. Yeah, so.
Well, good.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you're signing up.
That.
Thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful.
Yes, ma'am. So, but again, thank you for the awesome meeting, and thank you for clarifying about how to register for the conferences, because I sure enough would have kept right on registering.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on tomorrow.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Anyone else have any questions?
Not questions, but it says this, the modules are keeping me going.
Oh,
as I'm
fantastic.
confined to the house.
Oh, I love it. That's great.
I keep telling everybody, there's people in my classes, other staff members who are 55 and 35, and I'm healthier than both of them put together. But I'm the one was told to stay home because I'm over 65.
Oh, Joan. Well, we're so happy that you're here, and hopefully it's not too much longer that you're having to endure, the annoyance, but yeah, it's a little annoyance to like stay healthy.
Yeah. But
right,
I have two of it started the Affirm and done 3 of the Affirm.
That's so great. I love it. All right, guys, I'm going to end the meeting and looking forward to seeing you all.